Hey, Retcon Raider here. And as promised, I'm back with another video focused on Phoenix Point. Today I thought we'd spend a little time looking at the game's soldier mechanics, including things like soldier customization and what we know about the class system. Now, I should make it clear that although I'm a tremendous fan of the project, I don't have any secret inside information. I just try to gather all the latest news, and then I compile everything I know about a specific topic into a single video, with a bit of speculation on the side. If you're already a superfan, then it's entirely possible that you'll have already heard everything I have to say. That said, let's start by taking a look at the most reliable information, what we've heard directly from Julian Gollop in Snapshot Games. First, customization. Although individual soldier customization wasn't really a big deal back in the original XCOM titles, it seems to be one of the features that Julian Gollop really liked in the newer XCOM remakes. So he's made it pretty clear that Phoenix Point is going to have a fairly comprehensive customization system when it comes to deciding the physical appearance of your individual soldiers. This will include things like choice of clothing, facial hair, tattoos, and scars, all of which will be purely cosmetic with no mechanical effects in battle. Although each soldier will come with their own semi-unique randomized name and appearance when you first recruit them, you'll be able to change this to your liking, if you prefer to theme your soldiers after some specific media property, or perhaps your friends and family. And much like in the latest XCOM title from Firaxis, Phoenix Point will have a soldier pool where you can save your customized soldiers to make it easier to import them into later campaigns. But this will be further augmented by the component-based armor system that I mentioned in my Equipment of Phoenix Point video. This armor system will allow some further visual customization options, but unlike clothing, these armor components will also have a direct impact on your soldiers' offensive and defensive capabilities, most notably when it comes to suffering damage to specific body locations. So it will be important to balance your personal aesthetic style with practical equipment selections. In addition, while the player will initially begin the game with access to an assortment of cosmetic options themed around the Phoenix Project, the other factions also have their own unique cosmetic options. The Disciples of Anu have a wide variety of cult-themed clothing and accessories, while the Soldiers of New Jericho have an almost post-apocalyptic look, and the Scientists of Synedrion have a clean, futuristic wardrobe. These faction-specific customization options will not be initially available to the player, but over time the player may be able to gain access to them, if they advance their diplomatic relations far enough to allow for trade or interfaction recruitment. So there's nothing to stop the player from fielding a full team of robed cultists or Mad Max cosplayers, as long as they're willing to work closely with the faction that provides those cosmetic options. And of course, soldiers will also grow naturally over time, becoming more distinct from one another as they suffer through battle after battle, while fighting to retake the Earth. Over time, soldiers will suffer permanent physical injuries, which will presumably be reflected on their character models. These can be debilitating, but can also theoretically be mitigated or perhaps even fully repaired with access to the right technology. The Disciples of Anu, for example, have enough control over the mutation process to allow for targeted mutations that might make up for a crippling injury. What's more, their technology can even be used to mutate healthy soldiers, granting them bonuses, as long as you don't mind them looking a bit monstrous. The Soldiers of New Jericho, on the other hand, rely heavily on cybernetic prosthetic limbs designed to replicate normal limb functionality. But they also sometimes equip them with potentially interesting enhancements. They also tend to preemptively amputate and replace any limbs that are showing early signs of mutation. So you can probably expect to see a number of cyborgs among the ranks of New Jericho's soldiers. Your soldiers will also suffer mental damage over time. This is, after all, a setting heavily inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Both insanity and drug addictions have been confirmed as mechanics in Phoenix Point, hampering traumatized soldiers until they can be properly treated. Another important aspect of your soldiers' growth is their attributes, but we don't really know much about those just yet. Thus far, we've heard the most about the willpower attribute, which will be used as part of the will point system. Aside from that, we know that there's a perception stat that presumably controls your accuracy with ranged weapons, a mobility stat that presumably determines how far you can move with a single action, and an endurance stat that will presumably control both your soldiers' health as well as how much weight they can carry. There's also a complex skill system, but that's another aspect of the game we just don't know much about, though we've glimpsed some icons in the various screenshots that Snapshot Games has released. Apparently, Phoenix Point will include several different skill trees, giving us ample opportunities to specialize our soldiers for specific roles on the battlefield. And that brings us to what everyone really wants to hear about, the soldier class system. Unfortunately, there's still a lot we don't know about this particular mechanic, but Snapshot Games did recently give us our first big glimpse into what they're planning with Update 14 of the official crowdfunding campaign on Fig. Let's start with the basics. Yes, there will be a class system, inspired at least in part by the one featured in the more recent Firaxis-made XCOM titles, but with some key differences. First, Phoenix Point will make use of a two-tiered class system with 3 basic starting classes and 5 advanced specialist classes. The classes aren't intended to set hard limits on what a soldier can and can't do, but rather are intended to synergize with certain strategies or equipment loadouts. Each class comes with its own unique skill trees, and as the soldier gains experience points, they'll gain additional skill points, which can be used to unlock additional skills. Although these skill points will primarily come from battle experience, it's also been stated that they can come from training, possibly from specialized facilities you can build in your havens. However, unlike in the more recent XCOM titles, Phoenix Point will allow, or possibly even encourage, soldiers to take skills from multiple classes. What's more, Snapshot Games has confirmed that there is no level cap, so theoretically a soldier with enough skill points might be able to master multiple classes, greatly increasing their versatility in battle. There will be 3 basic classes, which have recently been identified as the Marksman, the Assault, and the Heavy, each focused on a different attribute, perception, mobility, and endurance, respectively. And once a haven has the right training options and technology available, a soldier can advance from a basic class to a specialist class. These specialist classes are described as having more refined, interrelated skill groups, and it's interesting to note that there will apparently be slight variations on each specialty class depending on which base class the soldier came from. So, what are the 5 specialty classes? Well, unfortunately, we don't know the answer to that just yet, but we do at least know about one of the specialty classes, the Infiltrator. The Infiltrator was actually teased at a few weeks ago, back with this piece of concept art, where you can clearly see her right near the center of the lineup. But she wasn't specifically identified until Update 14, where they spruced up her appearance with some new accessories and gave us a veritable boatload of new information. The Infiltrator is essentially a scout or guerrilla warrior focused on using stealth, traps, and mobility to harass and ambush their prey. It's mentioned that at least some of their skills are geared toward close-quarters combat, likely why they're pictured with those tremendous swords, but they have plenty of ranged options as well, with stealth weapons like silenced firearms and crossbows. They'll also be ideally suited to the use of items like gas grenades and proximity mines, which will presumably go hand in hand with their trap-based skills. And since we're on the subject of specialized equipment, Update 14 mentions several other pieces of specialty equipment that the Infiltrator can make use of. They'll have high-tech helmets that grant them 360-degree vision, breathing filters, and integrated communication systems. Their armor will be equipped with internalized climbing gear, including grappling lines and retractable climbing spikes, that will allow them to more easily navigate vertical terrain. It's also mentioned that one of their possible loadouts includes a Drone Hive backpack, which is loaded up with miniature drones that can spread out in all directions to essentially create a high-tech surveillance cloud. Which I can't help but notice is similar in concept to the way the Pandora virus uses the microbial mist to alert its mutants to the presence of nearby enemies. It's also interesting to note that Snapshot Games has made reference to faction-specific variations of the Infiltrator class. The Disciples of Anu, for example, have access to mutations specifically tailored to benefit the Infiltrator class. while Sanhedrian has developed advanced tech that can also further improve their abilities. That adds an additional layer of complexity to what already sounds like a fairly deep class system, with both your base class and diplomatic alliances shaping how your more experienced soldiers will end up. So, we know a bit about the Infiltrator now, but what about the other 4 specialist classes? Well, Snapshot Games has been playing that pretty close to the vest so far, but Julian Gollop did mention a Priest class during his interview with Unstable Voltage. Specifically, he mentioned that if the player were to assist the Disciples of Anu, they may reward the player with a volunteer who just happens to have been groomed for the Priest class inside the cult, which in turn would grant her some special skills and abilities based on her faction. This might imply that one of the 5 specialty classes is the Priest, but it's just as likely that the Priest is a special class exclusive to the Disciples, and that what the player would actually receive in that example is a character with one of the 3 basic classes, but with a few unique skills to represent her faction ties. It's hard to say for certain, though, which leads us into more speculative territory. Going back to this piece of concept art, we know that these 2 soldiers on the right are likely indicative of basic default classes, most likely the Marksman and Assault class. And now we know that this one is an Infiltrator, one of the 5 specialty classes. So what about the rest of these guys? Well, this one has been identified as being from the new Jericho faction, which makes sense given the very distinctive headgear. Given that he's carrying what appears to be a scoped Gauss rifle of some sort, it's possible that he's simply a marksman from the new Jericho faction. But it's also possible that he might represent a more specialized sniper class, or perhaps a class unique to the new Jericho faction. And this one has some design features, such as the hexagonal detailing and the bubble-like helmet, that heavily imply it's a Sanhedrian soldier. Julian Gollop has made some vague references to Sanhedrian making use of mobility and defense-enhancing powered armor, so perhaps this is one of their specialty troops. Speaking of which, there are also some design similarities between the Sanhedrian and the more recent concept art for the Infiltrator Specialist class, perhaps implying that this particular Infiltrator is the Sanhedrian-specific variant, with the faction's unique mobility-enhancing gear. This fellow all the way on the left could be a Heavy, the only basic class that doesn't seem to be represented in this lineup. Although it's a bit difficult to tell from this screenshot, the Heavy pictured near the center appears to be carrying a very similar loadout, including a face mask, exoskeleton, and rotary minigun identified as the Browning M2HB. However, the exoskeleton he's wearing is nowhere near as bulky as the one shown in this concept art, which might imply that this concept art shows another new Jericho soldier, since Julian Gollop has stated that the new Jericho faction uses powered armor to help with deploying heavier weapons on the battlefield. Of course, that's all just speculation on my part. Unfortunately, we're not likely to know much more until the gameplay demo comes out. But hey, Snapshot Games has said they're hoping to get that out by the end of the month, so hopefully we'll be getting that in just a matter of days. But until then, this is Retcon Raider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Phoenix Point, you can keep up with all the latest news by checking out the official website and the official crowdfunding campaign over on Fig. Links are in the description.